Today, some more excellent advice on planning the landscape, the yard, of your mid-century home from Jim Drzwicki of Ginkgo Leaf Studios. Jim and I last spoke in September, and if you missed that episode, go check it out because it's full of excellent advice on how to get started on new projects or just your next project in a mid-century yard. So now you're wondering why mid-October is a good time to talk more about landscaping. Aren't Jim and I in the Midwest? Isn't this the time of year when there's less to do and less beautiful growth happening outside? Well, that's exactly today's subject. We are talking about how to winterize your mid-century yard, both what you can and should do outside in these weekends and late fall, and how to plan a yard that's lovely in all seasons, including the winter. Hey there, welcome back to Mid-Mod Midwest. This is the show about updating MCM homes, helping you match a mid-century home to your modern life. I'm your host, Stella Hansman, architect and mid-century ranch enthusiast. You're listening to episode 2213, and this episode is about winterizing. It is about how to plant a year-round garden. It is about Jim sharing the things he has learned in his own career, in his own yard, and in working for clients. And it also kind of accidentally turned into me getting to ask Jim all the questions that I have about my yard and what I've been doing right and not so right in it over the last few years. If you are at all like me, a person who appreciates the beauty in a well-curated yard around a mid-century house, but is not actually very good at your own yard, I think you're going to find this episode extremely helpful. Let's just go out on a limb and assume that some of the questions I'm asking him are not just for myself, but are actually going to be quite applicable to people who are looking to make good, strong choices for their home, who are trying to make their life easier and their yard more charming and fun, and also who maybe are not experts in in how to take the best care of their mid-century yard. So Jim's going to give us advice on the importance of planting evergreens in a Midwest garden to provide structure and interest all year long. How you can leave your ornamental prairie plants standing through the winter, and not only will it be interesting and attractive, it'll be beneficial for the local wildlife. He's going to give us permission to not over-tidy our yards in fall, in fact, to provide food for birds and insects and generally be good for our surrounding macro environment. And we're going to talk about plant choice and strategy to make your whole yard management easier, more pleasant, more fun, more successful. Jim actually said something toward the end of this episode that I want to highlight right up here at the top, and then I'll let him make the point beautifully for himself later, which is that we are not necessarily trying to plan our yards like gardeners. A gardener is someone who enjoys the work of being outside their home, of constantly preparing and changing and editing and tweaking their yard. A gardener may have a gorgeous yard, but it's not an easy one. If you're an average homeowner who just wants a beautiful landscape with minimal effect, you don't want to take the advice of gardeners and for gardeners. You want to take advice that you're about to hear today. And yet again, Jim and I really agree on the approach. Just like you need a master plan for your house in order to have a stress-free, successful remodel, even if your home improvement projects are your hobby, having a plan in advance of taking much action at all on your yard is going to set you up for success and create something that is both more beautiful and also easier and more likely to succeed. All wins. So let's get right into winterizing and planning for winter. As always, you'll find the transcript of this episode, all the useful advice in one place, plus an easy way to find links to all the other episodes that we've had with Jim, all of his advice on mid-century landscaping and mid-century yards over the last several years. On my website, go to the show notes page, midmod-midwest.com/2213. Here we go. It's so good to have you back again. Jim Drzwicki, landscape designer and owner of Ginkgo Leaf Studio, is one of my favorite people to ask for advice about what to do outside of a mid-century house, the yard, the hardscaping, the plantings. And as we're coming towards the end of the season, I wanted to have him back on and talk about mid-century yards in winter. Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. So last time we were talking about how important it is to think about not just the season you are currently gardening in, but to think beyond Memorial Day weekend energy, beyond what's pretty in the fall, and think all the way through the year. What do you think about winter as a Midwestern experience and maybe as a universal experience of planning for a garden?
I would argue winter is just as important as the other three seasons. If you've lived in the Midwest your entire life, like I have,
Same.
uh, yeah, people have seasonal, disorder with the lack of sun and vitamin D and everything that goes with that. And so the last thing you want is a bleak landscape. That's a word I've been using a lot lately. We want to avoid that feeling in your yard. That can mean as simple a thing as making sure you have a good ratio of evergreen plants to deciduous plants.
Hmm.
I was once criticized by a fellow designer for not putting enough evergreens in some of my designs, and I haven't forgotten that. Um, but also, there's so many other things, and I'm gonna maybe pull fall into this discussion too.
Sure.
Um, there's so many things available to us with the seasonal change from fall into winter that we in a Midwest design get to take advantage of as a designer. The landscape doesn't have to end at the end of summer when everything stops blooming. There are fall blooming plants that you can throw into the mix. The whole reason, one of the main reasons ornamental grasses became such a thing in the 90s and have carried forward to today is that they remain standing in the fall and through the winter
Right.
and give structure to a garden. I always say the ornamental grasses are the yuccas and the agaves of Palm Springs for the Midwest.
Yeah.
So if you've seen a design you like where you say, oh, I really like how they did that row of agaves. Well, you're in Minnesota. That's not going to work, but you could pick an ornamental grass that maybe has the same height and shape to it and do the very same thing. Um, then you go on to even looking at, well, what do the flowers look like on the given plant when they dry up and turn brown in the
Mhm.
fall? Um, the structure of some trees can be really beautiful to look at in the winter that you might not notice that structure when they're fully leafed out.
Yeah.
Um, the bark. Does a plant have peeling bark or colored bark? Are there berries on a given plant that will stay on the plant through the fall and winter? So there's all these tricks that if you know your plants, you can make sure that the landscape doesn't just look like everything died and now it's going to be a depressing 3 or 4 months until spring comes.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting to think about plants as structure, which of course they are. But if you are purely planning your garden based on annuals you pick up at the garden center, those are largely going to vanish right back down to the ground when they're
Correct.
done with their bloom. So that doesn't leave you with anything. That leaves you with a purely flat bed. So thinking about things that have structure that will last, that will stand through the winter, even if it's going to come down again, like a grass. Um, when so if you've got ornamental grasses as part of your winter structure plan, when do you go in and cut them back? Do you give them a chance to start over, or are there some grasses that grow up through themselves? How does that work best?
That is a great question. It's one of the things I wanted to talk about today.
Oh, perfect.
As you meant off camera, we were talking about winterizing a
Mhm.
garden.
Yeah, exactly. What to do to get it ready for the snow times.
Right. And honestly, I was thinking about that and I don't winterize my garden, I guess, in the true definition of the word. And I think that's because of that right plant, right place idea. I'm not a big fan of doing a garden where I have to put, I remember the styrofoam cones that people would put over their roses
Yes, I've
to
got a couple of
insulate
neighbors who
them.
do that, and their
Yeah,
roses are beautiful in season, but it is a bit of an odd. Clearly, it's their preference, and that's
sure.
great for them. But there is a styrofoam container or a weird sort of netting object
Right.
over for like 4 months there, quite a while.
Right. I understand when it needs to be done, but wrapping evergreens with burlap to make them get through the winter. Well, one of the reasons to have evergreens is so that you see something green in the winter, and if you mummify it with burlap, you're not seeing the green plant in the winter. So it's
So
kind of counterintuitive in a way.
what's for that one specifically? What's the logic? Is that having chosen a species that just isn't up for the hardiness necessary for the Midwestern winter? Or is that sort of like an old wives' tale of people are doing it because they feel like they should?
Yeah, it's a little of both.
Maybe it depends.
Wind burn in the winter is a real thing, and evergreens can lose moisture through their leaves and their needles. So that's something that the burlap helps protect them from. Um, Evergreens that are planted out near a street or a road are going to get exposed to road salt spray.
Okay.
Burlap can help protect them from that. Um, but I also think sometimes the wrapping of evergreens or covering ground cover areas with pine boughs or spruce clippings, I think is maybe a little old wives' tale. Maintenance company is getting a chance to charge for a little bit of extra work.
Got it.
Uh, Now, that segues to the point I wanted to make where you asked about cutting grasses back. Hannah and I, are big believers in a spring cleanup of our perennials, not a fall cleanup.
Okay.
Uh, I think lots of landscapers sell fall cleanups. I truly think it's a way to extend their billable season more than anything, because you do want these plants to be standing all fall and winter. That first frost we get, if you have coneflowers standing and dried hydrangea flowers and ornamental grasses, it's like Jack Frost came in and individually painted everything.
They are so pretty. Yeah.
If those plants were cut down in the fall, you talk about bleak, you have nothing to look at. So grasses should remain standing until the spring. You have to know your varieties of grasses, because one of the most popular grasses out there, Carl Forster, it's a very narrow, upright grass. It is not native. So it's considered what we call a cool season grass, which means it starts growing while we're still in a cool season. Because of that, it's great for screening things like air conditioners,
Mm-hmm.
because the daffodils may still be blooming and Carl Forster grass could already be 12 inches tall.
Oh, nice.
So a cool season grass, you want to actually cut back before the new growth starts.
Okay.
Our native grasses like switchgrass, you have time because they really don't get going till June. And then you can cut that brown old growth back. But you are helping the plant also, because now it has room to send up its new growth.
But in both cases, you're waiting till spring. It's just you've got to be Johnny on the spot with the Carl Forster, or
Yes. Yeah. And alliums, you mentioned alliums in our previous talk.
I did.
I'm not talking about the big globe alliums that are the true spring bulb alliums,
Hmm.
but the perennial allium, one of the nice things about it being in the allium family is it does send up its leaves very early. Again, when the tulips and daffodils are blooming, allium is starting to grow. I think it's nice because you get to see something green,
Yeah.
that time of year.
And
But
it's structure already early in
yeah,
the not through the winter,
yeah,
but in the spring.
right. But you don't want all those dried flower stems from the previous year to get in the way of that new foliage growth.
Okay. Interesting. So you kind of have to know how early your garden is starting to time that, get out there and clean it up.
You have to understand that there are certain plants that are going to grow or start growing earlier than others.
I've gone both ways, and I will admit it's largely a combination of happenstance and laziness when I take down the prairie plants in front of my house, whether I do it in the fall or the spring. When I leave them through the winter, I do notice they tend to kind of get crushed by one or the other of the big snowy dumps. Is there anything you can do to help them? Should I put in some rope and guide wire or something like that? Or is it hopeless? They're just going to eventually fall.
That is a tough one. It's funny that you brought that up because I almost was going to say something about it.
This is me
Um,
purely just picking your brain for my own
yeah.
benefit at this point.
Well, one of my favorite clients, I won't say his name because I'd be name dropping, but he's very persnickety about how his landscape looks. And we put in these beautiful switch grasses behind a undulating fieldstone wall in his front yard. And they looked amazing in the fall because they turned bright gold
Oh, gorgeous.
and then they turned tan. But we got a heavy, wet snow and it flattened them.
Mm-hmm.
And he has had his grasses cut back ever
Oh
since
no. So now
in
we
the
want to take the
fall.
risk.
He just does not want to see that happen again.
Well, is it possible? I don't know. This might be a little bit unhinged behavior. Once they've been flattened, can you go out and do anything about it, sort of between one snow and another? Or,
It's not a crazy question. I guess I've never tried it in my own garden. Um, I suspect probably most of the stems are probably breaking.
Mhm.
So they're not going to be able to be
That's what I mean.
brought
I
back
find
up.
that there's not really much to prop, but I don't even, I mean, I don't really cut them. I just go back and pick up all the broken pieces or maybe jiggle them back and forth to get the last
Sure.
connections gone. Once they've broken, yeah, they don't stand back up again. But
Yeah, I think it's this sounds more dramatic than it needs to be, but it's the risk you take that
that
by
does sound dramatic, but I hear you on that.
by leaving these plants standing so that in the fall and winter you have something to look at. And yeah, if we get 12 inches of wet snow one night because it happens, it's going to impact how things look.
Yeah.
Um, I I should have taken this photo. It was 2 falls ago. I'm backing out of my driveway and I look at my house and I'm telling you, if I could pat myself on the back as a designer, I had all these different grasses still standing. I had the structural evergreens and boxwoods there, uh, the Korean maple still showing fall color, the dried heads on my hydrangeas, and every different shade of brown you can think of. And it looked, I mean, it looked like a painting. It was this snapshot of what a fall garden can really look like. And I love driving past my house in the winter after there's been a snow because it looks way better than everyone else's in my neighborhood.
I think you're right. I think the first decision I made because I'd had a couple of wet snow crushes of the
Mhm.
prairie bed, I decided last year I would be tidy and clean it all up. And then it felt very bleak until this is why I was out running around thinking there's nothing my yard has been flattened and it's not growing in until July. And so I'm looking at other people's spring plantings and like looking for the allium structure because it's up already. But I could also solve this problem. Maybe it's a twofer, but I could solve this problem by not cutting it back to zero at the end of
Well,
the fall.
you're also helping the wildlife. Um, the birds that are hanging around are going, there are seeds
Hmm.
in the spent flowers of various perennials. Liatris, goldfinches love the spent flowers on salvias.
Yeah.
So if you want to see goldfinches in your yard, plant some salvia. Um, the cone flowers, the cone becomes a little pot of seeds that the birds are going to eat, until they've depleted them. Um, you're not even supposed to cut your perennials down too early in the spring because certain bee species and other insects live in the stems.
Oh, really?
You're not supposed to
Great.
pull your leaf litter away too early because there are some insects that are living in that leaf litter that haven't erupted yet to be alive again. So if you bag all your leaf litter too early, you might be bagging some, butterfly cocoons or whatever.
Hmm.
So there really is this, you know, getting in tune with nature kind of idea to understand the right time of year to do very certain things, because if you do them at the wrong time, there can be some slightly detrimental effects from that.
That's so interesting too. And I think a lot of the people who listen to this podcast are interested in making sustainability minded choices for their house. And so probably would be swayed by an argument to keep up perennials through the winter as bird life. I certainly see the little birds landing on the stems and stalks of my front yard prairie grasses. I noticed my next door neighbors have a very old fashioned yard with very carefully curated, trimmed, they're out there with the box trim. I don't know what type of leafy and evergreen shrubs they've got, but it was an 80-year-old's house, or maybe more like a 90-year-old's house until a few years ago, and the new young family that's moved in haven't made any changes. They also have grapes in their front yard that really grape in the fall. And I have consistently forgotten to tell the new owners that that's happening, and I'm not sure that they know. Anyway, that's beside the point. But there is like a flock of little birds that I can't identify, some sort of little sparrow, something, that live in their evergreen and then fly over all at once and land on the plants in my prairie bed, and then fly all away again and hide in the evergreen. And they're really cute.
Yeah.
But
berries on certain trees and shrubs are huge. Cedar waxwings love the berries on spring blooming serviceberry. So if you put that native tree in your landscape, you're almost always going to have cedar waxwings in your yard, and they travel in these chattering little flocks. Robins love serviceberries too, but that takes me to the crab apples. And they've actually bred some crab apples now, because some people hear crab apple and they immediately think, I don't want crab apples all over my patio, or they're going to attract hornets in my grass. Well, they've bred some crab apples now to have what's called persistent fruit, because it persists on the tree. It doesn't fall to the ground. The fun added bonus of that, beyond seeing berries on the tree all winter, is that in the spring, when the robins migrate back, that's one of the first trees they go looking for to replenish their energy. And fruit that sat on a crab apple over the winter is now fermented. And you will get to watch drunk robins staggering around under your crab apple.
Oh, it's fabulous.
Yeah.
I knew it this is such a digression, but the park where I walk my dog every morning is an 80-acre former county property just outside of Madison, and it was once an orchard. And so there's apple trees all over it. And the trees, nobody harvests them. They're all chaotically high. And so they drop a lot of apples on the ground, and they do ferment. And all the dogs eat the fermented apples. I've not noticed them getting drunk, but they create a smell. You smell them in the spring when the snow goes away. But that's hilarious to think of the intoxicated robins joyously partying.
It doesn't take much to make a robin drunk.
No, they are the definition of lightweights.
Yes.
Well, this isn't probably we can't. Well, we could do a whole episode on it, I'm sure, but maybe we should just touch on it now. If you wanted to plant, and we were going to talk about winterizing, but if you want to plant a yard that's going to attract birds, do you have people that ask you for this? Just point of interest. And then what do you advise them if they want a bird-friendly landscape?
People don't ask me as much about a bird-friendly landscape as they might say butterflies.
Okay.
But that being said, kind of not necessarily as a focus, but if you just plant a good-looking garden with seasonality, sort of the byproduct is that you're going to have a bird-friendly garden.
Right.
Number one, you're attracting a lot of insects, and that means the birds are going to be eating the insects. When a client says, I want a butterfly garden for my daughters to look at somewhere in the landscape, my answer always is, your whole yard is going to be a butterfly garden. And I could argue really a pollinator garden. And certainly that's become a more important topic lately.
Yeah.
With the issues with honeybees and bee colonies collapsing. I have neighbors, three or four little kids. They live on a property that had horses, so it's a decent sized lot, and they make honey. They have apiary. They have beehives,
How fun.
and one summer they brought us a little jar of honey with a tag on it that said, "Thank you for feeding our bees."
That's so dear. Oh.
Right? So my flowers were helping their bees. Um, and that's kind of what we strive for in any landscape. You have your prairie perennials. I would say 50% of the perennials, if not more, that we put in a typical landscape are either true native prairie plants or a cultivar of a native.
Hmm.
And that's what we want. We want to be feeding the bees. The alliums that I mentioned are bee magnets.
Oh, good to
I've
know.
shot video where the allium flowers are practically moving because there's so many bees in the plant. Um, Monarda attracts hummingbirds. So if you really love hummingbirds, put a bee balm Monarda plant in your garden. Hyssop that I've mentioned before. Bumblebees love that plant. And the bumblebees and the honeybees are the nice pollinators, right? They're not the jerks of the insect world like the wasps and hornets who
Right.
do pollinate. But anytime someone is worried about, attracting too many stinging insects, I always remind them that really probably 95% of the insects that will be visiting your flowers are going to be the honeybees and bumblebees, and those are not the aggressive ones.
And we like supporting those. Is there anything else? Actually, well, now I'm just taking us right away from winter, although we've touched on planting for seasons. What do you think about, we've talked about not cutting down your official plantings, but what do you think about like a no mow May approach or trying to leave lawn areas alone up to a certain point for pollinator friendliness?
Yeah, I've heard both camps on the whole no mow May thing. Um, I think, of course, the less pesticides, the better. I've heard horror stories about a certain type of tree being sprayed at the wrong time of year, and the next day they found dead bumblebees all over the ground. So the less pesticides, the better. Um, and if that means living with a few dandelions in your yard, I am all for that. Um, because I am so cognizant of making sure the landscape is healthy for the pollinators.
Hmm.
Um, so I think anything you can do that takes us back to not removing leaf litter too early and not cutting stems down too early, because the early season bees are the ones that you're going to be impacting.
Right. It's the
Um,
queens, right, that are out there
right, the
first.
queens and carpenter bees, I think, are early season bee. So they may be in those stems overwintering. Um, those, yeah, those are all things that should be thought about in terms of the landscape and the seasonality of it. Um, I forgot to just touch on the winterizing thing. If you are picking the right plants, I don't really have to winterize my landscape. I let nature be the winterizing. I'm not
Yeah.
wrapping in burlap. I'm not covering plants to protect them in the winter. I'm leaving them be. The one caution I might make, and I think I experienced this past winter, is you can maybe put the leaf litter too thick,
Mm,
and then you might be creating a haven for the moles and the voles and the mice to hang out in your plant beds over the winter.
got it.
So I think there's a limit to just how much leaf litter you should have. Of course, it helps the plants, but I think if you have too much, you might be encouraging the rodents to be hanging around more.
Ultimately, I think your advice tends towards we're planting things that are suited to this climate zone, and so they shouldn't need too much of a boost to make it through the winter part of the season.
Correct. And in the summer, I don't put sprinklers out. I don't irrigate my plants because once they're established, The varieties I've chosen should not need supplemental watering.
Well, and that should speak to efficiency as well as energy efficiency, that's one more garden task you don't have to do.
One less task, using less water,
Mm-hmm.
and ecologically sound.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, anything else you would think about? I probably will point to this episode with a note about winter. Anything else you think about setting up for an aesthetically pleasing winter-oriented garden that you do either to winterize or just any time of the year, the choices you make overall?
I I think if you can pick plants in general that have more than one season of interest, it's so easy to just pick that certain plant because you like how it looks when it's flowering.
Hmm.
A colleague of mine once pointed out that you might want to think about what that plant looks like when it's not flowering, because maybe it even becomes an ugly plant.
Yeah.
Um, those fall blooming perennials I mentioned before, and I'll name a couple right here. Ligularia, broadleaf ligularia. There's a ligularia variety that blooms in June, July, that has spiky leaves, but broad-leafed ligularia blooms in September and October. There are fall anemones. One is called September Charm
There you
because
go.
it starts blooming in September, sometimes earlier. So thinking about plants that have more than one season, ideally two or three.
Hmm.
It's rare to find the true four-season plant. The serviceberry tree I mentioned earlier is actually a plant I would call a four-season plant, because besides its spring bloom, its summer berries, its fall color, it has multiple branches, so it has great winter structure.
Yeah.
So it's kind of crazy how many factors go into us choosing a plant palette for a project, because we're thinking about height, width, um, foliage texture, foliage color. You can have too much green.
Hmm.
We've even been talking just recently how we need to maybe mix in more plants that have burgundy foliage, or chartreuse foliage. Um, the form of the plant. Is it wide and squat? Is it tall and skinny?
Hmm.
The evergreen issue that I've talked about before, that if you don't have evergreens, even if you have all this cool texture and fall color, it's going to be missing that key ingredient that really is sort of the bones of a fall and winter landscape,
Yeah.
is having some evergreen plants.
I think that's great. And at the risk of overwhelming people, I think the answer is detailed planning. Planning ahead, starting small as we talked about last time, and then building in the layers that you're looking for, but also just trying to pre-imagine the situations as much as you can and do your research, choosing things that are the right for the climate zone, and then as many of those other checklist items as you can as you sort of build out what you're putting into your yard. There are wins to be had. And as you say, when you do it right, you don't have to winterize, you don't have to water. You can be living sort of, your garden can be living in the season, just like you are.
I think if most of your followers saw my front yard in the summer, they'd say you're lying if you're telling me that you don't do anything to this garden. But I really don't. And part of it is because I'm lazy. Part of it is because I don't have time in the summer because of what my own job is.
Right?
You know,
Oh man. Yeah. If you haven't planned a low maintenance garden for yourself, it won't get the care it needs when you're busy for other people.
right. It's that, saying that the mechanic drives the car that's all beat up and not running well.
Yeah.
It should be the opposite, but um, I just want a landscape that's going to look amazing and doesn't require a lot of effort on my part. And if you have the expertise to do that, um, I mean, that's why we exist, and that's why people hire us to do their landscapes, because they maybe just don't really want to dive into Google and plant books and all those things to make sure that they are doing it right.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. That people, I think a lot people, because sometimes people who love to garden love to putter. It can seem like when you're not a person who's done a lot of gardening, that the only way to have a beautiful garden is to constantly work in it. But it's also, to me, it sounds wonderful to hear that it's possible to plan for a garden that will look good and kind of take care of itself and need a few annual cycle things, but
But
doesn't need constant meticulous manipulation because it's been planned to do well where it is.
there's definitely a difference between the classic gardener that likes to putter,
Mm-hmm.
that will put plants in that need to be protected in the winter, that will try to stretch the garden zones and put in plants that probably won't live, but they're going to give it a shot, and the average homeowner.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm telling you, I could give an average homeowner a landscape that might actually look better than the gardener's landscape solely based on putting in the right plants.
That also, I mean, I think there's a certain element to if you love a craft or a specific sort of hobby, you can sometimes take yourself into overly elaborate versions of it just because you've done it for a long time and you like to make things complicated. But sometimes the most beautiful answer isn't the most overcomplicated. So that's, yeah, I think that's a really good, maybe that is a punchline for this episode is that it doesn't actually have to require a whole lot of work to be beautiful, thoughtful, environmentally friendly, pollinator friendly, and require not so much water in the summer too.
Well, and you just used a great word. It's one of my favorite words lately, and that's thoughtful. And my other favorite word is intentional. And those are, I think, the basis of what we do as Ginkgo Leaf Studio. Those are our buzzwords when we're doing a design because we're not just whipping up a quick plant list of things we like that, let's just, and we're not doing that over and over again on every project we do. Every yard is unique. Um, every client is unique. Every house is unique.
Mm-hmm.
And if we are still trying to play off the house, well, then every one of your followers' yards should look different.
Yeah.
They shouldn't look like the same thing over and over again. Um, and we've talked about this even last year. I think a Midwest landscape should look like it belongs in the Midwest.
I agree.
And that means some prairie plants, that means some grasses. Don't try to recreate Palm Springs in front of your Minnesota house
Yeah.
or your Ohio house. Say no to white marble chip.
Yeah. And speaking of high maintenance hassles, absolutely. That's
You
not
are
for us
creating
here.
you are creating more maintenance and effort for yourself if you try to make your landscape not be what it should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a difference between curating something that's really appropriate and tailored for the people, the house, and the microenvironment, as opposed to just sort of choosing something willfully that doesn't fit the landscape, the seasons, the place where we are putting it. So, well, I feel like I got to be very selfish in this episode and ask a bunch of questions of you that have been on my mind for a while, but hopefully there'll be other ambitious but less outside energetic fellow homeowners that are getting some good advice. And I really feel like now I've been authorized to leave my prairie plants up this winter and let the chips fall as they may. They may crush before it's over, but I'll get much longer to enjoy them, certainly, than I would if I went out and chopped them down before the first snow. So
Well, and we've had winters that don't have a lot of snow.
it's true. Or it doesn't fall till February. So,
Right. And it may be happening more.
yeah.
So imagine cutting down all your perennials and grasses only to have a winter with no snow. That would really be bleak. So I think that alone is the reason to consider, keeping everything standing.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. And to tie this back right at the end to an episode we've done in the past where we talked about lighting a mid-century landscape and getting Christmas lights planned into that.
Yeah.
One reason I'll be able to leave it standing this year that it wasn't last year is that I've done some more planning and I've got permanent hooks in for my under the eave Christmas light string. It's not up all year, but it's going to take less work to put it up now. So I won't have to get in there with a ladder and do some pre-crushing of the prairie plantings that are right under it.
That's a good thing.
So I will link, by the way, if that piqued your interest, good lighting for mid-century landscapes, I'll link to that episode in the show notes. So that's a really good one to go check out. Actually, I will link to all of the past Jim episodes because they are basically all absolutely chock full of excellent advice. And we will have to have you back again to get more. I don't know exactly when that'll be, but in the meantime, write us an email, comment on Instagram, comment on YouTube. Let us know what your questions are about landscaping around mid-century houses because I think you've got more to tell us.
And I'll second that. If any of your listeners and viewers do come up with questions that they want to funnel to me through you, they're just giving us new subjects to talk about in the future. Absolutely.
Well, I've gotten a lot of positive feedback over the years about the things you've had to say in the past and how helpful people have found that. So thank you for coming again and sharing your wisdom with everyone, and also specifically answering some of my questions about my yard this time.
Of course.
Great to chat with you, and we will do it again soon.
Okay, thank you.
So grab that episode highlighting mid-century yard lighting, and particularly Christmas lighting, planned in your yard master plan, if you will, plus the transcript for this episode and all the other great advice that Jim has shared with Mid-Mod Remodel Podcast over the years at midmod-midwest.com/2213. And thanks again to Jim for all of this excellent advice, reassurance, and really the permission structure to plan our yards like homeowners and not necessarily like gardeners. And for all the gardeners out there, if you are a gardener listening, absolutely knock yourself out planning the most elaborate, high-maintenance, detail-oriented garden you want. That's kind of the way I like to knit, but that's not the way I like to do my yard. So for everyone that loves to work in their yard, go crazy. But for everyone who just wants a beautiful yard that flatters their mid-century house and is relatively appropriate for their microclimate, go give the transcript a scroll and see if there is anything you need to actually jot down for your future reference. That's all for this week. Next week, I'm going to be back with mid-century remodel nightmares for, Halloween, spooky season. We're going to talk about some of the nightmare scenarios for mid-century houses that we see too many places. Maybe with some how you can avoid them. Certainly with reflecting back on a couple of episodes ago when we had unflipping on. There are things you can do about them, but we're just going to cathartically get some of it out of our system. So if you've got something you want to share with me, make sure you drop it into my Instagram DMs before next week, and I may include it in the podcast. Thanks so much. See you then. This episode was written and recorded by me, Della Hansman, and produced by Rebecca Rossi. If you'd like to support the show and mid-century homes in general, please subscribe so that you never miss an episode. You can help other people find us when you leave a rating and review, or recommend us directly to a friend with a mid-century house. Find more of Mid-Mod Remodel on Instagram, YouTube, or pop right over to our website to check out our services. I would love to design a master plan for your home or teach you how to create one for yourself in my Ready to Remodel program. Thanks so much for listening to Mid-Mod Remodel. I love that you love your mid-century house. I love it too.